Hello and welcome to another episode of a Brothers Creed podcast, where we talk about motivation, experiences, and exploring the world around us. We're the Thomas brothers. I'm Ethan.
And I'm Jared.
And to start the episode off today, we want to just have a quick request for you. If you just go ahead and press pause real quick, go over to whatever platform you're listening to this on, and subscribe to a Brothers Creed podcast, to the channel there. And leave us a comment if you would. I'm guessing maybe you've listened to other episodes, but it really would help to promote the episodes, to get us at the top of the charts, and to really have other people really having that exposure to the episodes.
Yeah, just if you could write just a comment, just what your feelings are. Then if you give us a rating as well, that'd be fantastic, because we appreciate your support, and that helps us get more street cred, and others can see us as well.
Yeah, we got to play that algorithm, right?
That's right.
Also, thank you to our first Patreon supporter. You know who you are. We really appreciate the support. That person has access to 2 additional episodes per month that are not released to the public, as well as the archive from going backwards to this point and everything in the future. So thank you for supporting us, and you can go to the link in the description as well for our Patreon page.
Yeah, please support us in that if you can, and you can get that extra content and our extra episodes, which are great episodes, by the way. Those are some of my favorite episodes.
Yeah, I had somebody tell me the other day, man, I really want to listen to the episode on treasure hunting.
It's like, go subscribe.
Go subscribe.
And support us. So anyway, today we have a great episode. We're talking about understanding memory and improving our memory. It's such an interesting piece to talk about and to discuss about how our minds work and where things are stored and how they're stored. And so we're going to talk about that today and kind of dive a little bit deeper into the details and talk about maybe ways that you can improve your memory. So,
all right, let's do it.
You can't climb the ladder of success with your hands in the pocket.
We will not go quietly into the night.
They tell me you're a man with true grit.
I am the one who knocks.
Don't ever tell me what I can't do, ever!
That's how winning is done.
Okay, let's go ahead and dive in here. Like I said, today we're talking about memory. So one of the first things when we talk about memory is really there's kind of several main processes that occur in memory. The first you have to acquire the information, store the information, retain the information, and then later retrieve it. So you can basically break those down into 3 main parts: encoding, storage, and retrieval. Really, the encoding is how you take in that information. So there's 4 primary ways to take in information from around us. First is the visual encoding, so how something looks. So, first time you see your wife or as a girlfriend, you're like, wow, she's stunning. So, obviously that imprints in your mind, or if you see something horrific like a plane crashing into the Twin Towers or something like that, that's etched in everybody's mind, Or you ever see someone's like, oh man, like I got hurt, and then they show you a picture of like their what happened to them, and then you're like, oh, why'd you show me that? Now that's etched in my mind.
Yeah, you're like, now mine hurts.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the first way. The second one is acoustic encoding. So how something sounds, obviously. Have you ever had any memories of just sound? Sometimes a sound will just throw you back.
Yeah, and I don't have any specific example of sound. I have one you'll probably get there, but like smell. I have a couple memories of like
that's the next
smell,
one.
Yeah.
The sound one, I do have one of those. So my wife was showing me this TikTok video this evening, and she was like, "Oh, look at this video," and it was something about like the caption was like my 2-year-old trying to tell me something, and it's the song. It's like, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, there was like a song in Mexico when I was on my mission in Mexico, and it was basically that. It was like, shakarom, 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 and I was just like, this is the most awful thing in the entire world. And I heard that song so many times that whenever she showed me the TikTok video and I just heard the song, my mind just like was taken back to all that annoying song that I heard all the time, and I was just like, ugh.
I actually do have one. It's a song related one too. What was it? The Coldplay song, like Vita something.
Viva la Vida. It's like,
Dun, dun, yeah, whatever
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I think it's
Viva la Vida.
Viva la Vida. I think
Yeah.
that's what it was. But every time I hear that
how's
song,
it go again? It goes, I used to rule the world.
yeah. Every time I hear that song, I think of a specific car ride coming back from, it was like my senior trip to Myrtle Beach. And my friend and I were driving back, and like I just can feel like the windows are down. It's the summer. It's nice outside, and we're just cruising home and singing that song. And like every single time I hear that song, I'm brought back to the exact same memory. And so, yeah, I mean that.
Yeah. What's that song? It says, every time I hear that song, I go back, to
Yeah.
the feel of a 50-yard line, whatever the song says. It's a country song. But yeah, so that's one way that we encode things. So the next way is tactile encoding. Oh, excuse me. First, let's... there's tactile encoding, which is how something feels. How... the softness of something, or how... I don't know of any memories that I can think of how something feels. Maybe just like a soft. I can't quite think of how things feel.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe.
First time making love to a woman. You remember how that feels? Done. Memory remembered.
Okay, memory remembered. Sure.
So the next one. Well, talk about your olfactory sense. So your smell. How does that help you remember?
Oh yeah. I can't even remember it now. I got to talking about the other one and it's completely gone.
So
If I remember it, I'll bring it back.
So
up.
your sense of smell and remembering something. I'm trying to think if I can. Sometimes if I hear, you go ahead.
I remember one. So I remember as a kid, one time I threw up. I got sick and threw up, and I guess mom or dad or whatever cleaned it up with Lysol. But it wasn't like the scented Lysol. It was like old school Lysol. That's like
Pine Sol.
Yeah, it was like but didn't have a good scent. It just has a very distinct scent to it. And I remember I smelt it whenever they're cleaning it up, and every time I throw up, I associate that smell. Or every time I throw up, I'm like, for some reason I smell that smell. I'm like, I didn't even use that to clean it up. And then going the other way around, I smelt that smell like a year ago, and it almost made me sick.
Huh.
Just because it was
association.
Yeah, because that's what it cleaned. I don't know. They cleaned it up with, and it was like every time I smell it. I mean, I don't actually get sick, but it's like I take it back to that memory, and I'm like, oh, I remember.
So here's the thing, this is not to say that I think about other women if my wife ever listens to this episode, but sometimes if I smell a girl's perfume, sometimes it will remind me, like, oh, that smells familiar. And sometimes at this point I can't place who it was that I knew that smelled like that, but I'm like, I knew a girl that used to smell like that, And I've forgotten all prior girls before my wife, but I know that, I used to date a girl that smelled like that. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the powerful ones, I think.
So what's interesting is that while information typically enters in via one of these methods, the form in which the information is stored may differ from its original encoding. So the way that it was originally encoded. So sometimes you can have a memory, and whatever you ingested it, sometimes you can remember it just via a song because that song was playing on the radio or something like that. So there are two types of memory widely known. One is the short-term memory. So that is really 15 to 30 seconds. So in your short-term memory, you're that's when you're kind of memorizing short numbers, entering your credit card number into the thing. Usually it's only between 5 and 9 items, and with an average of 7, it's 15 to 30 seconds. So the shortest, there are some studies that have done that argue that the information that is encoded acoustically is primarily the shortest primarily stored in short-term memory, and is only kept there through the constant repetition or rehearsal.
So things that you hear,
are typically only encoded, or acoustic
short-term.
Acoustic information is only short-term. And so long-term is the other one. Now, well, let me actually talk about this other one. So there's this other one that's kind of in between the two, and sometimes say it's one, sometimes say it's not there. But this is what they call working memory. So working memory is often confused with short-term memory, and this is memory. It's a kind of a go-between short-term and long-term memory. And the memory is used for memorizing information and using it later for a task or completion. So that's kind of, you can sometimes find that they argue that's the in-between. So then there's the long-term memory, and the capacity for that is limitless, or not limitless because the brain is finite, but it is immense. The semantic information is primarily stored there. So semantic information is how you feel about something or what the meaning is. So like when you take in the meaning of that. So if you like speak, rudely to your girlfriend in high school, and she's like, "I'm dumping you," and you're like, "Oh man," and you're like really internalize that, and you're like, "If I'm mean to my wife, or if I'm mean to women, they'll not want to be around me." And then so that's like you internalize that meaning, and that's what sticks around for a long time.
Yeah, I think I shared this quote before one time, but a quote that I really like is it says, "Information without emotion is forgotten."
Yep.
That being able to emotionally tie or have an emotional tie to a memory will help kind of cement that in your mind, and you'll easily be able to draw back on that specific time, and I've had some of those, personal emotional times where I'm like, man, I really remember that, or I remember that specific time, or I can like just stop and think about it, or every time I tell the story, I could think about it and I remember it. So
yeah, in fact, I was teaching I was asked to teach it at as a guest lecturer the other day about storytelling and data analytics. I don't know if our listeners know, but my background is in finance and in data science, and so I was asked to speak to a group of college kids about data analytics and storytelling. And so one of the things I was talking about is how when you tell a story through data and through uses of data, you need to bring up some emotion with it and tell the story, not just share the data to say, "Oh, look, sales went up 10%, and then our EBITDA went down 15%. It's just like you have to actually tell a story, because that emotion is going to stick longer with it. So if I'm telling a story about a customer who went through a difficult time and difficult issue, I tell the story, I hook them in with that emotion, and then I can dump the data on them so that they're like, "Oh, okay," and I show them the insights from the data so that they associate that story, so that when they walk away from the meeting, they remember that story that I told them, and then they're like, "Yeah, that story," because they're not going to remember what percentages or this or that or this, but they'll remember the story and how they felt. And so that's one important thing to do when you're telling stories, or to tell stories when you're presenting. One of the next pieces here, so it's interesting how we retrieve different information. So short-term memory is retrieved in the order in which it was stored. So if you're memorizing something quickly, then you're like, okay, you're writing, then you're going to recall it back in that same order. Like if someone just tells you their phone number, you're going to repeat it back in the same order. You can't repeat it backwards or something. And then the long-term memory is retrieved through association. So, for example, remembering where you parked your car. You can often go through the same exit in the department store to know, oh, this is the part of the mall I parked my car at. And so that's kind of an interesting piece about how we recall those. Now, there's one, there was an interesting study done that by a guy named Herman Ebbinghaus. Probably butchered his last name. But he did a bunch of conditioning experiments, and what he was doing is he was practicing just random words that like letters put together. So like fo, fa, ti, tum, ton, and like he would just memorize these different things, and then he would check his memory over the time. So he developed and this is in 1885. He developed what's known as the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. And this curve is kind of a forgetfulness curve, which shows, at the time of remembering and recollection, you can remember 100%. But then over time, your recollection of those facts and those nonsensical things that he was remembering that decreases down to obviously to zero at the end. And he said, so he figured out that it was a function. This is one of his quotes. He says, "Not all memories follow the forgetting curve. as there could be various other factors in play, such as noise and other environmental factors. Because of their influence on what information is remembered, not all memories are affected by detrimental effects of interference. So he said that the two factors at play here are the time elapsed and the learner's memory strength. So it just depends on how good of a memory you have,
and how much time has passed.
Yeah. So and it's hard to say at 5 hours it's 60% down, because it's different for every person, because every person has a different memory capacity and a different ability to remember. So that's a very cool thing. We'll share maybe a chart on Instagram about that, so you can maybe a test, so you can do your own Ebbinghaus forgetting curve on yourself.
Yeah. I'm sure there's some sort of, diminishing return type thing where it's like, after a certain amount of time that it just falls off.
Yeah.
And memory is a really interesting thing. I remember when I was a kid, I used to be able to memorize stuff. Like, that was like what I was known for in school. I could memorize like crazy, and it was so easy. What's funny is that my 6-year-old is the same thing. He can memorize stuff, and you repeat it to him a couple times, and he's got it, and he'll just repeat it back to you. And so it's interesting because I'm not that way anymore. Like, I remember I did I was doing this was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I was asked to do a part in a Christmas play thing where I was like playing Joseph.
Yeah.
And I had like 2 lines, right, where I had to get up there and I had to say like 2 sentences. And I had it memorized, but then I got up there and I was just like, well, I didn't have enough time, whatever. And I was like, shoot. And so I got like halfway through it and I was like panicked, and then I had to like look at my cards and be and like read it off the cards. It was like 2 sentences. I was like, why couldn't? And then I got done with that and I was like, why couldn't I memorize 2 sentences? Yeah. And it wasn't like I was in front of a million people. There's probably 50 people there and everything, but
that's a lot of people to choke like that.
Yeah. So and like 90% of the people knew who I was too. So it was like,
geez.
But it was fine, and it was a good situation, and it was kind of a last minute thing, but that just kind of made me think of, and I was thinking about it today, is that, why is it that, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, but, why is it that I feel like my memory is not as good as it used to be?
Yeah, that's interesting. One thing that was a funny thing is when I was in high school, I sucked at Spanish. And what's funny is I was like, I'm never going to use Spanish, and then I ended up going to Mexico for 2 years and speaking only Spanish. But before, when I was in high school, that was my worst class, and I think I was getting a D at one point, which was like unacceptable in our household. And so I was like, you know what? I don't know how to conjugate any of these verbs, but I do know how to memorize words. So I just took the vocabulary and memorized all the vocab words so that I would know exactly what the vocab words were, because that was easy, but I could, so that I could kind of get an idea what the sentence was saying.
You don't have to conjugate it. Have to know.
Yeah, if I knew all the vocab words, then I would get like a decent score on the test, at least like maybe 70%.
Yeah.
So I was just playing on my strengths there. But just a few more things. So the reasons why we forget are when memories are rarely accessed, they decay over time. So kind of like that movie Inside Out. All the memories get sent to long-term storage. And then after a while, they're just like, oh, do we need this anymore? No, like this hasn't been pulled out forever. So they suck it up in the tubes and it goes into the pit of forgetfulness, So that's really kind of interesting. But when we do touch those memories and we do bring those things up, they can we remember them better. And so also interference with other memories sometimes. Like calling someone by the wrong name just because they look like someone else. Sometimes that can cause us to forget things. So I'm sure that one time in your life, if you have more than one kid, you've probably done this. My brain is mush after having all these kids. That's probably why your brain is mush.
That was one thing that I said at the very end. I said I used to be able to memorize like paragraphs. Now I can't even remember my freaking kids' names.
Yeah, seriously, man. Oh man, and yeah. And the last one is failing to store it in the first place. So, or forgetting things due to traumatic events. So there's certain events in our lives that can occur that are traumatic, abuse or different things that can occur that can make you forget things, or your memory just blots those out so that you can continue to go on in life and not have that trauma, even though that trauma still seems to come forward.
One thing I think is really interesting too, and this happens to me, and I think everybody does it to a certain extent, but a lot of times we look back on memories, and even if like two people were there together and they experienced it at the same time, their memories are completely different, or they can be completely different. And a lot of times people, and like I said, I'm guilty of this. I'll look back and I'll like embellish memories, right? You'll kind of like, you don't really remember it exactly, so you kind of put your own fluff in it as you're telling the story, and then
that's how tall tales happen.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I was listening, we were in a conversation the other day, and it was me and two other people, and one of the people that I was with said something or told a story, and the other person was like, "Wait, that's my story." And the person was like, no, that happened to me. And the other person was like, no, that happened to me. And it's just like, I mean, they were husband and wife. And so it just kind of like, and it's been like so many years. It's kind of like, I don't know.
Your stories meshed together, yeah.
Whose story is that really? It's like the memory is almost changed.
They've become one.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, that's totally true. Is like, you just create these tall tales and these things in your mind and just expand the story.
Yeah.
It's part of creating legends, That's how oral history gets passed down. And that's why, you get these things that have maybe a shred of truth, but, going back all the way. I think another thing that's interesting about memory is I was looking in here and just talking about, like, eyewitnesses and stuff, and how eyewitnesses, like, when they identify people, it's very hard, like, almost it's unbelievable. Because, and one thing that's interesting about that is there's something called racial blindness. And what that is that if people... Like, let's say, I think it happens, it just happens, people outside of their race, they have a more difficult time recognizing differences in facial features with a race that is not their own, because, or a race that they are not commonly associating with. So, for example, and I saw this when I was before I went to Mexico, I had kind of a racial blindness in that I couldn't really tell very many nuanced differences between how one Latino guy looked and the other Latino guy looked. They just looked both Latino. They're dark hair and brown skin. But once I was in there and I was like, I was there for 2 years in Mexico, and I got to really, I was the only white guy around. So it's like that went away. But that happens a lot of times, especially with crimes and stuff, because, people don't know, they don't know the features, and they're blind to that, and they don't know how old someone is because different races look different when they age too.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I had the same experience when I went to Chile. I was in northern part of Chile, which was basically borders Peru and Bolivia, and when you first get there, it's sad to say, but if you don't have the exposure, everyone kind of looks alike. But then you really get to know these people, and you get to know the language, and then, after a little bit of time there, I could have said, oh, well, that person's from Peru, and that person's from Bolivia, and that person's a Chilean. And I wouldn't be right 100% of the time, but most of the time. And, I mean, I think that's kind of cool. You kind of represent your country by the way you look. Yeah, and the accents and stuff, too. But
also, like, the way that you talk changes your face. Like, if you look at British people, you can tell that they're British because of their teeth, but also because of the way their jaw is, because they speak differently.
Yeah, and I would say, they sometimes people talk, with maybe more the back of their throat versus the front of their mouth, and yeah, I think they're definitely gonna have a chance. I was gonna say, I forgot what I was gonna say. Go ahead, keep going. It'll come back. That's happened to me twice today, so this episode on memory is going to help me out.
So I had two stories on memory I wanted to share. So one is I've always heard that soccer players get brain injuries and they can have memory loss. And so there was a study that was done that by Lipton, and he says that mild brain changes and memory impairment similar to what is seen in concussions was seen in players who headed the ball 1,550 times or more per year. And then those who were doing it 1,800 times per year had the worst memory loss. And so they said that if you're like under like 1,000 times a year, then you're probably okay. You're like not so bad. But heading the ball and basically jarring your head like that, because when you play soccer, they said that you can hit that ball anything from like 6 to 12 times a game. And so if you're hitting that ball and your brain is basically getting sloshed back and forth, that creates damage to your prefrontal cortex.
I've never even thought about that, but yeah, I mean, there's no protection, there's no anything, especially if somebody like, punts a ball, or I mean, that ball is hard, can be very hard, and it can be flying pretty fast too. So,
I mean, you just think about boxing too. I mean, just look how dumb Mike Tyson is.
Oh, geez, we're gonna have a hit out on us.
I mean, that just been punched silly, man. But seriously, like, what was that? That was the whole plot of what Rocky V is that his brain was so damaged that he
couldn't fight anymore, and they said if you fight, then you're gonna have severe brain damage.
And then he fought Tommy Gunn.
Well,
and then he fought again in Rocky Balboa.
But he was old. It was like, if I go brain dead at this point, then
he's got a good life insurance policy.
Yeah. Hey guys, I just wanted to take a quick break and say thank you for listening to this episode and invite you to support us on Patreon. As a loyal supporter, you will get exclusive access to 2 additional episodes per month, which are not released to the public. You can find the link to our Patreon page in the episode description. Let's get back to the show.
So yeah, those are some things. Oh, one story, but personal story I wanted to share. And this is about brain dumps. So when you're thinking about doing tests, there's a methodology called like a brain dump. And a lot of tests will allow you to have a scratch sheet of paper. And so when you're doing something that has a lot of formulas and stuff, this method is like really good. So when I use this a lot in college, and when I had like, and this is my undergrad, when I had more of like memorizing formulas and stuff, specifically in my statistics and economics classes, I would just memorize all these formulas, and then before the test, I would just have them all in my mind. I would walk into the testing center. I wouldn't talk to anybody. I would study. I would probably study for 5 hours before the test. I wouldn't talk to anybody, walk into the testing center, sit down, and then just dump all the formulas and everything I knew on a piece of paper, and then I could take the test. And then I could reference back to that piece of paper. And so some places are like, no brain dumps, I took the Series 7, and they're like, no brain dumps. And it was like that's a FINRA test for financial advisors. And they're like, no brain dumps. You can't do that. And so, if you're in college and you give a scratch sheet of paper, definitely do that, because it's a really cool way to dump out all that information and use that almost as like a reference.
Interesting. So
that leads into the next part.
Yeah.
How can we improve our memory?
So we've talked about understanding memory. Now we want to talk about how to both maintain memory and improve memory. So really, memory is kind of the foundation of who we are, right? We are defined by our experiences, and that defines us because we remember those experiences. If you touch the stove and it's hot, if you touch the top of the stove and it's hot, then you're not going to want to do it again because you remember that pain. So really, memory is the foundation of who we are. But this means that as we get older, people have the tendency to kind of, that memory starts to wane a little bit. And really, it has a potential of a study that I looked at, a Harvard study, was talking about how it can represent like a loss of self, right? If you're kind of losing your memory, and concerns about declining thinking and memory skills rank the highest among the fears of people over the age of 30, which was kind of interesting.
Over the age of 30?
Yeah. So
really?
Yeah,
wow.
I mean, just saying, I'm concerned about, it wasn't the highest, but it said it was among the top fears of people over the age of 30 that were just like, I am not as sharp as I once was. So I don't know. So
Wow.
a couple of those things, there's all different types of things that can cause injury or damage or symptoms of memory loss. You can have anything from, a traumatic brain injury where you hit your head one time, maybe really hard, or a lot of times, like in
A lot of
soccer.
times
Yeah,
really
like a lot of
hard, yeah.
times maybe not that hard, not as hard.
Or the concussions with like the NFL and stuff.
Yeah, for sure. You have things like Alzheimer disease and dementia that maybe are more physical and mental in nature. I remember one time, so our great great grandma Meme, she was like 96 or 97 years old when she passed away. But I remember she was getting close to that age. She was in her early to mid 90s, and she didn't have Alzheimer's. She didn't really have dementia, really. But I remember one time we were sitting on the couch. It was me and Meme, and then who's my great grandmother, and then my grandma, who was sitting on the couch. Well, and we were just talking with Meme, and she was telling us a story, and she was like, "Oh yeah, and we just put that back porch on the house, and it's so nice, and we like to sit out there in the summer and just enjoy the weather and enjoy nature and everything." And I was like, I looked at my grandma and I was like, did Meme put a porch on her house? And she was like, no, that was 30 years ago. And it was just interesting because Meme was living it like it was like yesterday. I mean, there was a couple times like that, and talking with grandma, she was kind of like, yeah, she kind of loses track of time sometimes.
Well, I think that sometimes when you're old, you have every day is just like the last day.
Yeah.
And so if you've ever been in a situation like that where every day is so repetitive, the time just bleeds all together, and if there's no differentiation in time. It's just like, this is, it just it warps it almost.
Yeah. And so, I mean, what really causes some people to lose their memory while other people stay, sharp as a tack? So I kind of dug into that a little bit. I think there's kind of two reasons, right? Genetics play a certain role in memory loss and retention, and you had kind of mentioned earlier, like your memory capacity. Each person kind of has their own memory capacity.
Yeah. Yep.
And then, so you have genetics play a role, but also so do our choices. Our choices play a role in our memory as well. So how do we? And I'll go through some of those choices in a little bit whenever I talk about how to protect our memories. So, how do we improve memory and remember better? Let's say. So to me, when I was thinking about memory really is closely tied to focus and concentration. For me, I get distracted very easily. And so, if I'm working on my computer, will I have the TV on and then watching a YouTube video on my phone, and then my kids are running around crazy and my wife is trying to talk to me about dinner, I'm not going to remember much of anything of what's going on.
You spread way too thin.
Yeah, and so memory and concentration and focus for me was something to think about. So how to improve memory. The first one, and these I'm just going to kind of go through a couple of these. First one was focus your attention. Work, or maybe in the case of if you're studying, work in a place free of distractions such as TV, music, or other diversions that might distract you. Another thing that I thought was interesting is avoid cramming. This was specifically talking about studying, how kind of like studying an hour a day, building up to a test is a lot. Let's say studying an hour a day for 5 days before you get to a test is better than studying 5 hours a day or 5 hours for 1 day before the test.
Yeah.
Now, I think that's different. I think if you really want to do good, then you study an hour 5 days before, and then the day before you have kind of a heavy day as well.
Well, it depends on the kind of information you're trying to remember, right?
Yeah.
Like with the forgetfulness curve, if you're trying to remember facts and formulas and stuff like that, you need to remember that right before. But if you're trying to remember like principles and things like that, and like that's where maybe the more long-term stuff comes in.
Yeah, and I this brought me back whenever I was doing a biology degree. I was you take general chemistry 1, general chemistry 2, organic chemistry 1, and organic chemistry 2. And really each one kind of builds on top of each other. And so Gen Chem 1 was kind of, it was all the basics and everything, and then 2 just kind of built on that, and you had to have that memory, and then 3 when I got to organic chemistry 1, it was kind of like it was really hard to try to relearn everything if you didn't know it from the 2 prior classes.
Yeah.
And it was like, I could study for 10 hours before a test, but if I hadn't studied or really paid attention in the other 2 courses, then it just really builds on top of each other. So that was kind of a little bit of memory. So avoid cramming in situations where, it's better to spread it out. Another one, and this was for me important, was structure and organization. Organization helps you group like topics together and helps you remember those specific things. And just personally for me, I've noticed this too, is that, and I kind of go through these phases. I went through a phase at work that was like a sticky note phase, and I was just like, oh, that's important, I got to write down, and then I write it down, and then I put the sticky note on my monitor, and then I was trying to figure out what works best. But then I had like 50 sticky notes on each monitor, and I'm like, wow, which one was that? Which one was that? I'm like pulling these off and trying to figure out where the heck I was. And then, I switched tactics and tried to get more organized and said, okay, well, I'm going to move to, two notebooks, where I had one notebook was this is what you need to know, kind of a training notebook, and another notebook was a to-do list. And this is what I need to get done and prioritize. And that significantly helped me to not forget things.
Yeah, making to-do lists is huge. Like if I feel like my mind is occupied and I'm stressed, I'm like, I got so much to do. I make a to-do list and just like write out all the things. That way crossing them off is therapeutic. And also just like putting all that stuff on paper, now I don't have to have it in my head.
Yeah, that happened to me the other day with the podcast stuff. You and I were talking about, this was, I don't know, a couple months ago, but you and I talked about an episode that we wanted to do, and we were talking on the phone, and we planned out this episode, and then I got distracted, and we planned out, okay, well, I'm going to talk about this, you're going to talk about that, or whatever else, and then I didn't get to actually doing some research or looking into it until 4 days later, because I got into other stuff. And then I sat down and I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And I was like, what did we talk about? I'm like, I have no idea what I'm supposed to be doing right now. And I'm just like, oh, dude. And then luckily, whenever we were talking, I had just scribbled down some quick notes. And then I was able to, I found those, and I was like, oh, okay. I remember exactly what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
And then there's been other times where, I think you've done it too, where you call the other person and we're like, what are we doing again?
Yeah, totally. Because you talk about so many things. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. One funny story about the monitor thing with the sticky notes. When I was first out of college, I worked at a very small investment advisory shop, and it was just me and the portfolio manager and the secretary, basically. And this was very small, and I was like, I went up to the guy. I was like, hey, we have about 300 clients. We're managing all their portfolios, their 401ks. How are we keeping track of the allocation of each one of these clients? It's necessary. I mean, for compliance purposes, you have to keep track of what everybody's allocated to, because you have to make prudent suggestions based off of their allocations and what their allocation should be. And he's like, oh, you see these sticky notes that are on my monitor? That's how I'm keeping track. And it's like, his monitors look like sunflowers. They just had sticky notes all. And I'm like, we have 300 clients. And this is for an advisory shop. It's small fries to have 300 clients. I mean, this is 300 small clients, but I'm like, dude. So I built out an Excel way for him to manage all the accounts and stuff like that. But I was like, oh my gosh, this place is going to get shut down.
Seriously, I hope you don't get audited.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I left 9 months later.
So we talked about organization. Another one is use pneumatic devices. So, for example, if you want to remember north.
Never eat soggy waffles.
Yeah, north, east, southwest. Right. You would think of a compass. Never eat soggy waffles, or never ever smoke weed. Right. That's what I always think of when everything. Okay. which way is east, which way is north, and west, whatever. So that's a pneumatic device to help you kind of just remember something like that. It always
Please
sticks with you.
excuse my dear Aunt Sally. That's another one.
Which one was that?
Order of operations.
Oh, yeah. Yep. And then there's one for like the planets that I can't remember what it was. Something about oatmeal. I don't know.
Oh.
So another one was elaborate and rehearse. So repetition. Repetition is always good when you're trying to remember something specifically. Visualize concepts. We talked about that. One thing an example of this is I taught a Sunday school class to like 7-year-olds, and we were studying the New Testament or the Old Testament for that year. And it's really cool. The Old Testament is like full of stories, right? It's just story after story after story after story. And when I first started teaching them, we would read the scriptures out of the Old Testament. And these kids, like at the end of the class, you'd say, well, what did we learn today? And they'd just kind of be like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. So I kind of switched my tactic, and there was a chalkboard in the room, and I would draw the story of, I don't know, the walls of Jericho when they fell down. I drew the walls of Jericho, and then the armies marching around it and everything.
Yeah.
And so I changed it to where I was drawing these diagrams of what was going on, and this guy went here and there and there. And then at the end of the lesson, I would say, well, what'd you guys learn today? And they could tell me the story back. And they could say, oh, well, this happened and this happened and that happened. And so just the visualization,
Well, people learn in different ways. Visual learners versus people have to do something to learn it. So there's a lot, but that's a good example.
Yeah. So relating new information to things that you already know, and then reading out loud was another suggestion. This helps you both read it, but also hear it at the same time. Like my 6-year-old was reading, and he read a couple pages of a book, and I go, okay, well, what did it say? Explain it to me. And he was like, oh, well, I don't know. And this was, a while ago. He's just kind of starting to get his reading down and stuff. And then I said, well, okay, we'll read it out loud. And then he went back and he read it out loud, and then he was able to explain it to me a little bit better.
Yeah, see, that's one thing I have a question about, though. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. Is that when you read out loud or you're reading in your mind, that seriously slows down your pace of reading. And so, like, people who are speed readers or who can read super fast, they don't say the words in their mind. So when I read, I say the words in my mind, but like as I'm reading it. But like speed readers, like my wife, she reads so much and she reads tons of books. She just goes and she just looks over. Like her eyes are faster than her mind can think. That's why when we listen to like usually when I'm listening to a podcast, I'm listening to it on 2x speed or something like that. Especially if the person talks really slow. Sometimes it's just 1.5, but that can make a big difference. Like you can understand it quickly because your mind goes fast, but like when you're reading, if you're trying to sound out the words in your mind, that's slowing you down. So I wonder if teaching that practice to kids is a good thing. It might be a good thing for understanding, but I wonder if it's a good thing, a good habit to be in because it'll slow you down in reading.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I'm a really slow reader. I like to read, but the thing is, I'm just so slow at reading. And I think it's because, well, I mean, maybe I'm just a slow reader, but regardless. But I think one of the reasons why is that, like, when I read something, I want to read it with a highlighter in my hand. Yeah. And I want to read for context. And a lot of times I'll read something, and if I don't understand exactly what it was saying, then I'll go back and I'll read the same paragraph again.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, maybe there's just...
Yeah, like for me, like when I read like so thoroughly, like when I read, I'm like, man, there's a lot of spelling errors in that book. It's just like, I should start marking these and like send it to the editor or something, because like that's how thorough I read books, it's kind of funny.
Yeah. So that was some ways on how to improve your memory and how to remember things better. So here are some proven ways to help protect the memory that you have, and to basically keep yourself in a state where you're not decaying. Those memories aren't decaying. So one is a healthy diet, regular exercise.
That makes a big difference.
Yep, regular exercise, not smoking, keeping your blood pressure, your cholesterol, and your blood sugar in check. Meditation can be something that can improve memory.
So all those first things you basically mentioned, that's just being healthy, eating healthy.
Yep. Being,
That's such a huge difference.
I think physical health has a lot to do with mental health, or vice versa. Mental health has a lot to do with your physical health.
Yep.
Meditation, getting enough sleep. Next is
we had talked about the Russian sleep experiment.
Yeah.
If you haven't listened to episode 3, go back and
Halloween
the Halloween episode.
Halloween special.
Go back and listen to that one. Ethan talks about the Russian sleep experiment. Very good.
People do crazy things when they're tired. And
We're gonna do another
sleep.
Halloween episode this year, and it's gonna be awesome.
Yeah.
That was one of my favorite episodes.
So next one is living a mentally active life is important as well. So always challenging yourself. Like we had talked about learning a language. You talked about Spanish. I was in the same thing. I was in the same boat. I actually was failing Spanish in high school, and it's like Spanish 1. And the Spanish teacher called mom and came in. We had a parent-teacher conference, and the lady was like, "Look, Ethan's going to fail Spanish this year." And I had to do after-school Spanish classes for 3 months just so I could make a C in the class. Right?
Mom got me a Spanish tutor. We met at the library, and she was like teaching me Spanish.
Yeah,
words.
well, I had to do this because I was so out that I had
Past
to.
saving.
I basically the teacher, it was after school, and that she went back to the beginning of the school year, and we had to retake tests and all this kind of stuff, and
wow,
yeah,
it's
it
nice
was
of her to do that.
Yeah, so but I ended up making a C in that class, and then I was done. But then when
You should have gone back. Did you go back after your mission?
No, I didn't.
¿Cómo estás?
Yeah. But the funny thing is that whenever I got back from my mission at school, at college where we were, you could test out of, bless you, you could test out of their Spanish courses.
I did that.
Yeah, and so basically you would take their highest level Spanish class, which was like a Spanish historical literature class.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you passed that class, then you could basically take the final for all the classes beforehand. And I got an A in that class, and then I got an A in on every final exam all the way before, except for one of them on Spanish 5 or something. I got a B.
Boom, roasted.
Yeah, and so I got 15 credits of it was almost a cluster or minor in Spanish.
Yeah, I did the same thing.
And
yeah,
so,
that was great.
But it was kind of cool. Just it goes to that same thing. Is that desire and emotion plays such a huge part in it? Because in high school, I didn't want to have anything to do with it. But then whenever I knew I was going to South America, and then I knew that it was either a sink or swim situation, it was okay, I want to do this. My emotion is in it. And I did it. So
also, when you're in that place and you're like, if I want to go to the bathroom, I better sure as heck learn how to say this. Or if I want to eat something, or if I want to actually make my time here worth it and actually be able to talk to people, especially when you're with someone. I mean, it's just being in that environment is so much more encouraging than just in a high school class. You're like, is the hour over yet? Because I'm going to leave and go to a different class.
Yeah. So living a mentally active lifestyle, learning a language, and obviously you could try to be fluent in a language, or you could just learn enough to be communicative and talk with somebody. Learning an instrument, pushing yourself, memorizing quotes or scriptures is a huge thing. Reading, like we talked a little bit about reading before, but those are all things that you can do to improve or to basically protect your
cognitive
memories.
decline.
Yeah, cognitive decline.
You know what is interesting about people who live super long is that they are constantly, a lot of them work. They work until they die because, they work and then when they stop working,
until they're not able.
They typically die because their mind is engaged in that work and they're constantly engaged. Because when you're just waking up and just watching the History Channel every morning, your mind is not being exercised, and so it declines because it doesn't have that purpose. So working towards a goal working towards something really helps with longevity.
Yeah. So there are certain memory apps that you can get that say that they're going to help train your brain to remember things. I think one of them is Lumosity or something like that. There's other ones. They say that increasing caffeine consumption can help you focus, which can increase your memory or improve your memory. there's lots of different things, but I think memory it's just like a muscle. It grows stronger with use, and mental exercises keep you sharp, and it can just keep your skills and your memory tone. So, just constantly using it is something that helps. So I had put a quote together here, and it kind of goes right into that. It says, "When we become comfortable, we lose our edge, but we can get it back by pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zone." So specifically, when you're talking about memory, it's like, are you really helping your memory out if you're just, I don't know, vegging out on Netflix every single day?
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's not hurting your memory, but it's not helping you particularly.
Yeah.
Even if you're watching like documentaries on statistics or something.
Yeah. On Tiger Woods.
Yeah. Oh, I know what I was going to say earlier. I remembered it, talking about memory. This is a story that's really interesting. So we watched a documentary on the Unabomber. I don't know. Did you watch that documentary?
I haven't seen that.
So there's a
one,
documentary on the Unabomber, and basically everybody knows that that character sketch that of the Unabomber with the hood up and his glasses, right?
Yeah.
And in this documentary, basically they explain that character sketch that they used was not the original sketch. So the original sketch looked completely different. And then the FBI, 10 years later, went back to the lady that gave the original sketch, and they had her give her witness again. And they had the person
10 years later?
10 years later, they had her do the sketch again. And I think it was 10. I'm pretty sure it was 10, but it was years later. They had her go back and with a new sketch artist and tell us about this guy, tell us his features and everything else. And that is the sketch that they used for the Unabomber. And the funny thing is that they held that sketch up to the original guy that the original caricature artist, not caricature artist, but the
original portrait that she had described. Yeah,
it was the second one that she did looked exactly like the police guy who sketched the first sketch.
What?
Yeah. So she wasn't remembering the original guy.
She was remembering the time when she was giving that sketch.
Yes, she was remembering the time she was giving the sketch, and she gave a description of the artist that wrote the original, or that drew the original sketch.
Huh.
And they were like uncanny equal whenever
Wow.
they showed the Unabomber sketch and the artist that did the original sketch. And so she wasn't remembering. I mean, and she didn't know. I mean, she was just giving.
Why would
her,
anybody expect anybody to remember a face after that much long? I mean, heck, if you asked me to describe someone's face, I would be like, I have no idea how to describe that even to you.
Yeah, and then, but it was so interesting when talking about memory that it just gets so garbled sometimes, and it's so easily influenced by, and subconsciously too. This lady didn't know, but just the face of the guy who was the original artist threw off the whole thing. So
Yeah,
that was interesting. But yeah, whenever we just settle and we get comfortable, like you said, whenever we stop working, whenever we stop pushing ourselves, then we start to lose it. And you can get that back. You just have to get out of that comfort zone.
Yeah, engage yourself. What does the scripture say? Remain anxiously engaged in a good cause, right?
Yeah.
So my quote is, long-term and short-term memory are temporary because they both fade with time, unless we bring them back. Let me start over. Long-term and short-term memory are temporary unless we bring back the memory in our minds and reestablish its importance regularly. Through holidays, anniversaries, birthdays, celebrations, let us reminisce on the important events in our lives so that we can remember them forever.
Cool.
Yeah, it's just bring those things back out and polish them off.
Yeah. And I think one of the good thing is too is talk about them, like, actually bring those memories back and say, oh,
share them with your kids.
Do you remember when? And my wife is excellent at this, but take pictures when you can. I mean, she was going through some pictures of when we were first married, And it was like, oh, I remember that. I remember that. I mean, before we were even engaged, or actually when we were engaged, like 6 months before we got married, we drove from Arizona to Idaho. And I saw pictures from that trip, and I had completely forgotten about it. But then I just saw pictures, and I was like, I immediately remembered it. Like, oh, I remember that. Yeah, that was a fun trip. We talked about this. We talked about that. And so
sometimes my wife and I, on our anniversary, we like to remember back. Like, okay, what was our last anniversary? What was the one before that? So we remember back to, I think this year we're on like 11 or 12. I mean, I think maybe, yeah. So it's like we remember back every anniversary and like, oh, what were we doing then? And it's kind of fun to do that and just remember the fun times that we've had, because it's an eventful thing.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this has been great. I think memory is just such an interesting thing, and everybody sees it differently. But heck, it's important. For me, it was kind of a call to action for me to say I need to start doing better. You know, if my kids are memorizing something for church or whatever else, maybe I should memorize it too, just to kind of push myself. Or I don't know.
Yeah,
read out loud more.
Yeah, totally. Or not, so you can read faster.
Or not.
You gotta start somewhere.
Hey, I changed my Post-it note strategy, so
yeah, to OneNote, right? I use OneNote.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you everyone for joining today, and appreciate you listening. Again, please you follow us on Instagram, and we post some interesting stuff there. We post clips from the things, we post quotes, we post other things. We kind of post some pictures of our lives occasionally, just some videos, some funny stuff. So definitely follow us, and we'd like to hear back from you. We want to hear your thoughts and your impressions on the episode, what we thought was funny or what you thought was interesting, or suggestions for other episodes. So
yeah, and if you're not on Instagram, I know some of you aren't. Everybody's on Facebook. You can search A Brothers Creed on Facebook as well, and everything that we post on Instagram gets pushed over to Facebook, so you can get those notifications as well.
Absolutely. And you're on YouTube. We have 25 subscribers. Boom.
Yeah, moving up.
Subscribe on YouTube as well. We post a lot of videos on there from the podcast, and so yeah, you can see our pretty faces. So.
All right. Well, thanks guys for listening. Let's build that creed together.
All right.